Mark is the Director of Innovation and Product Optimization for Schwartz Farms, a family pig farming operation here in southern Minnesota. Fortunately for us, he's also joined the faculty here at the University of Minnesota in the College of Veterinary Medicine on a part-time basis as an assistant professor. He lives in Sleepy Eye with his wife Anita and the youngest of their 4 daughters, Maria, who's a junior in high school. So thanks, Mark, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. And thank you for the invitation, John, to visit with you today and share some ideas on this topic. When John contacted me and was asking for ideas on who might present to start this session out, I sent back a list of names, and then he contacted me again and with some more names, and by phone he said, well, why don't you just do it? So I'm here. So anyway, I'm glad to be here, glad to share some ideas with you. It was interesting to me as I prepared for this topic. It's like something I've lived for much of my career, and many or most of you here implicitly or in working on robustness, working to have populations of pigs, of breeding pigs, growing pigs that are robust. And we define that in multiple ways with growth rate and performance and reproductive performance. And so it took me some time to get what I hope are coherent thoughts and in sharing ideas and thoughts and how we can move forward as an industry to improve upon this robustness in our pigs. And really, the title being how the lack of robustness affects our farms. I'd say it'd be more accurate to say it's how it affects the pigs and those who care for those pigs on a daily basis. Right. So we do have a good story to tell. When you talk productivity, you look back, it's not that long of a time in the big scheme of things, 30-some years, but growth rates in the grow-finish phase going from 1.2, 1.4 to today, with routinely seeing growth rates from 50 pounds to market weight at over 2 pounds a day. In the grow-finish phase conversion, likewise, mid-3 conversions, and now commonly 2.6, 2.7 conversions. So that's a good story to tell. And most recently, the word sustainability is drawn into that same conversation. Reproductively, total born, going from the 90s, from 10.5 pigs to over 16 pigs currently. You look back on a summary by Bass in the Iowa State Enterprise Record System, 16 pigs per sow in 1996 in that data set, and 378 pounds of feed to produce a hundredweight of pork. And so now we'd be twice that would be common on a pigs per sow basis, and 100 less pounds of feed per hundredweight of pork produced. Likewise on total born, this is a data set from one of our farms. You look at a 4.7 increase in live born per litter from 2005 to 21. And so some incredible numbers. And so we look at that and we're looking at productivity, efficiency, proficiency. And so we look into robustness then, more specifically, and I look for definitions. And really one of the most applicable definitions I found kind of refers to statistical robustness. But thought it's very well applied. It said it provides valid results across a broad variety of conditions with other problems. And so you could take that to mean to apply to growth rate or reproductive performance across a broad variety of conditions, whether it's environmental, whether it's health stresses, disease challenges, and all these other things that we throw at these populations of pigs. And still, robustness would be defined then as a population of pigs and individuals in that population that still come out of those challenges successfully. So robustness then, again, it's this basket of parameters, I believe. And so I first had this slide of measurements of robustness. Well, really, it's characteristics of the underlying parameters. We look at growth performance in the nursery, and the finishing as a measure of how fast these, on average, this population of nursery or finishing pigs grow. Mortality, obviously, is one of those measures of the lack of robustness when high mortality groups occur at various phases of production. And whether it's pre-weaning in the nursing pig or the nursery grow finish pig, we use these as indicators of robustness. Sow longevity and what percent of our sows are retained until up to parity 3 as a measurement we use, saying that these sows are more robust, or a sow, if her longevity is improved. Fertility, age at first heat, and so the pre-session on Saturday, this whole focus was this. But I'll say that robustness is more of a qualitative trait, right, or variable. We wouldn't say that a sow retained to parity 4 is twice as robust as one retained to 2. I mean, it doesn't make much sense. Or as a population, if mortality is 10% higher, they're not 10% less robust. So to me, it's this qualitative trait measuring all these other things that we measure underneath them. This is not a new topic. And John, I found this from you presenting here at this conference in 1999 on the challenges of increased sow mortality. And so 24 years ago, this discussion was ongoing. So it's not a new topic to the industry. We've had our bouts of issues over the years, and this, again, being one of them. You can go back further in time to a report by a Dosset from the USDA on the etiology of hog cholera, and you could find multiple references to the severity of cholera. A herd of 20 brood sows and 85 pigs with 92% mortality. Another outbreak of 23 shoats in a herd of 22 of which died with lesions characteristic of cholera. So you go back over time, and this is a topic we've dealt with in various manners. But the focus recently on sow mortality, nursery mortality, pre-wean mortality, the gamut across our industry. Something, and you might wonder, why am I switching to pathogen introduction? A paper I came across, which was looking at trying to understand the aerosolization of Newcastle disease virus in broilers in the UK in 1973. And it's an extensive long study, and how did this virus get into these populations of broiler barns in these large-scale 6 to 8 barn sites in the UK. But what I was interested in was this phrase right here, in understanding how did that virus get into that population. And the mechanism of spread, with the density and the number of birds and all that, the mechanism of spread may be obscured by the multiplicity of possible routes. And I thought that really applied to trying to assign causality to the lack of robustness. It's not one factor, right? This multifactorial situation in which we've created this hyper-prolific sow, so increase in litter size, which we've worked for, and it's like careful what you wish for, right? So we've created large litters with the higher percent of small birth weight pigs, which has a carryover effect into the nursery phase and mortality. We've got co-infections of pathogens that we did not deal with not that many years ago. We've got environmental changes. We've got large groups. We've got all these factors that we're trying to sort out and say which one of these or which ones of these play into this change in robustness of our populations of pigs. And so, really robustness is we look at it at a population level. Pre-wean mortality is a percentage. If 15% of our pigs, 15 out of every 100 did not survive to weaning. Or if you look at litters of pigs in a room, that some percent are sound pigs of acceptable weaning weight, and perhaps 10% or 15% of 3 to 5 litters in a room may be small, went through severe early diarrhea, wean weights are substandard, quality is marginal, and so we're looking at these of percentage of these populations, whether it's pens of pigs in a barn or percentage of gilts in a birth lot, and what percent of these are cycling sows within a breed group. All these, closed out groups, so closed nurseries, closed finishers. We use that as our indicators of robustness in these populations. So it was talked about Saturday. There was a session this morning and on mortality across the various phases of production. And so again, you look at this, and it's been illustrated multiple times, but only 10 years ago, a dozen years ago, sow mortality at 8%, 8.5%, with most recent years in the low teens. So again, look at this and say, well, is that saying that 8 to 9% of our population of sows weren't robust? Now 13, so there's 5%, or how do we measure that? Another question I ask is, well, when we were here in the mid-2010s at 8% mortality, we weren't accepting that as a robust sow. We were trying to improve that. And it's like we're trying to work back to that level, which we weren't happy with at that time, and John, you weren't in 1999. We're like the frog in the pot of boiling water that just keeps not quite catching on to the changes around us. Another graph of the same data, but illustrating just that we've gone from a total born increase over the past 10 years with pre-wean mortality increasing to about the same level as our sow mortality. And so again, I don't know if this MetaFarms data isn't, I believe, trying to show an association between the two, but it's been brought up. Is that a factor in our sow mortality, these hyper-prolific sows and that stress on the body as a productive sow? A data set from our system going back to 2006. And again, this same time period in which this increase in mortality to extreme levels over the past several years. And so the data is all there. We've been grappling with that as an industry. Jason Ross and his team working on the sow mortality project for multiple years. And so it's being addressed. The robustness measures we use from birth to market, we look at stillbirth percent, pre-weaning mortality, nursery phase mortality, grow finish mortality. And we come up with this number, and it's been mentioned this morning on a session, it was mentioned Saturday. That total of those is somewhere in 30%, 33%. And as an industry, it's been acknowledged, but then what are the next steps to fix that? It's been brought up this morning on a session that if the consumer knew this number, they wouldn't, would they be in some manner averse to consuming our product because of these numbers? I mean, it sure doesn't help tell a good story that we're more efficient, but we're dealing with these numbers on a routine basis. The numbers were shown this morning at the increase in nursery phase mortality, again, a MetaFarms data set, a 10-year comparison. Again, if you go back further in time, the 3.5% mortality numbers I think we would find deplorable at that time. And so we're hoping to get back to a number that many would not want to use as our standard or our base. Finishing phase, likewise, the same trend, starting at 4%, going back to 2013. And so what other factors are involved in this change over time, where we had numbers that we didn't see as acceptable to even less acceptable in the past several years? One of the problems, though, I believe, is that embedded in those averages are lots of different observations. And whether it's nursery phase or finishing phase or pre-wean mortality by room, I can create something that looks like this, showing individual observations with any time period, where this is a quarter perhaps, or it might be all the farms flows combined, or it might be the PERS positive farms, or the certain farms. The distribution will look something like that. And what's saying is that there's lots of groups that we'd find very acceptable. And these outliers out here of these non-robust groups of pigs, or do we say that there's a high percent of the pigs that weren't robust because they died, that bring that average up to those numbers we just saw. And so the question is, what events, conditions are occurring that create these outliers of these groups of pigs? And you can look over time with your average improves. What we've done is we've reduced these on the right tail and pushed those back. A lot of times this doesn't change much. It's reducing these, whether it's severe PERS outbreak, a lateral infection of PERS with the mycoplasma, et cetera. And so the problem is we think in terms of averages, and we're doing analyses of these data sets looking at averages, when embedded in that are distributions like this. And so how do we tackle these? We're not going to improve these very much, most likely. Those are numbers in the 90s, 1990s, when routinely 1.5%, 2% nursery and finishing, even with some PERS challenge. So, trying to, again, think through this, again, the old classic host environment agent, when you look at infectious disease, and Gephardt and Jordan and his group, looked at these factors in nursery phase robustness, looking at infectious disease, pressure, weaning age, and weight, and then how we manage that pig at the time of birth up until the time of weaning, what management strategies are involved. All these factors, and within each of these, you can make a list of other factors that play into those that are functions, the robustness of or lack of is a function of the interplay of these. And so a PERS positive pig with some prevalence of flu at the time of weaning, a pig that went through an early rotavirus infection and those weight is substandard, and the wean age ranges from 22 to 16 because we're bump weaning, all those things are going to make a population of pigs that are less robust. Same thing from the same group on sow mortality or robustness or lack of it, anatomical and locomotor, all those things that happen adversely to that sow at the time of farrowing and shortly thereafter, and infectious disease. And so you take all these factors together and you say, well, those are playing into this equation of mortality. And you can add to that culling. When you look at sow mortality and that change, at the same time you have increased culling requiring this massive replacement rate. The two tend to go hand in hand. So trying to understand those and work through those. Again, going back to mortality, this idea of stationarity, right? Are we comparing the same thing that we're comparing to 20 years ago? We talk about circovirus and these groups of pigs that perhaps vaccine compliance was suspect, and we have we wreck a group of finishing pigs. PD, introduction into population in the early weaning phase, in a wean finish barn, mortality can spike to 10 to 15%. You throw on top of it some flu, PERS introductions, or PERS positive pig being weaned. You throw the newer, more recently discovered, I should say, sapovirus, which again compromises that pig from birth to weaning. And so we're adding probably some co-infections and stressors and adding these insults onto these pigs that we did not have 15 to 20 years ago. And so are we measuring the same thing? Are we measuring, if we could take out those new insults? And again, we're working with averages. So in those data sets, those groups that mortality was elevated from an introduction, or a PRRS introduction, with the massive mortalities that are witnessed from time to time that we did not see 10 years ago. Another factor in this is that as an industry, since 2009, we've broke somewhere between 22 to 30% of our sow herds in this data set, of the MSHIP data set, which is about 3 million sows and about 40 production companies. So any given year for 8 to 12 weeks, we're weaning acutely sick, PRRS infected positive pigs from about 25% of our herds, given the incidence of this data set. Furthermore, the prevalence is staying in that 40% range over the past several years. We're back into the early 2010s. It appears as though we got some more of these cleaned up and back to a stable pig being weaned. And so we're weaning pigs at that frequency and those numbers, acutely sick or at some stage a PRRS positive pig. And so those are I believe, some of the factors and issues that we're dealing with in our system and others. Related to that, even from my work, we do wean negative pigs. About 2/3 of those pigs become PRRS positive somewhere in the grow finish phase between placement and marketing. It ranges at times or it'll vary from 50% to 75% seasonally, but the majority of these groups of pigs become PRRS positive. Some completely non-clinical, some with mortality to some degree. So I spent a lot of time talking about mortality and the issues and the challenges, and to bring a bit of lightness to this discussion, we are doing things as an industry to enhance robustness. One is weaning age. There are more systems taking weaning age, extending it out to 23-4 days, getting away from the model of pushing more pigs, weaning more pigs, and pushing numbers. This work from Facina and others at Kansas State, this was Bertolozzo's group also, but looked at wean age from 19, 22, 25, and 28 days. And just looked at the percentage of pigs losing weight in the first week post-weaning. And that, going from 35% down to 9%, respectively, from 19 and 28-day wean age. And likewise, removal rate from the nursery, so not mortality, but removal, treatment, pulling into a pull pen, going from 8% to 1.6%, with increasing that wean age. So those are management strategies to enhance or improve robustness of these populations of wean pigs. Another management strategy that has improved the robustness of the grow finish is mycoplasma high ammonia eradication or elimination. So this process, I've been working on it for well over 12 years and to produce a mycoplasma negative system of across 16 herds. But that one strategy and the impact on that, I presented here, I think 6-7 years ago, the cost of mycoplasma in a system, and based on those farms at that time, it was like $2.30 a pig. And there were mild cases. We had one 2017, that number was $10 to $15. So that management strategy is a means of enhancing the robustness of the grow finish populations. Depopulation or closure for PRRS elimination. Again, working to reduce the incidence of PRRS infection in the grow finish pig will enhance the overall robustness of the population of finishing pigs. So I didn't do it today because it's what I do for my livelihood. You work on these numbers all day long. We can all talk about the value of a 1% change in mortality in nursery or finishing. We can say what the cost is if that pig dies from mycoplasma at 200 pounds versus a wean pig mortality. And we can measure it. We can throw all these numbers out. We know those numbers. We know the cost of mortality and the treatment cost, antibiotic cost, the labor, and all those. We know those numbers. And we can do all these models about if we can change things by 1% or improve sow retention. But on the topic of robustness, to me, a message today is those things we can't measure. And in the world in which finding and attracting and retaining employees, those people that are going to care for the pigs every day, and Dr. Yeske on Saturday showed a slide from 2004 talking about the difficulty in retaining and finding employees. 19 years ago. And so it's a difficult job without mortality. And you take the mortality and the decisions around that and the tasks involved in removal, it becomes a drudgery, and it really wears down on the employees. And it's the decisions of timely euthanasia, the sow in the nursing piglets, the nursery phase, grow finished pigs, and removing 300-pound pigs and 500-pound sows. Those are difficult tasks, and we're doing them twice as often as we used to, on average, as you look at those numbers. And so the other aspect too, and I'll challenge people here, I've challenged within my group, and sometimes it doesn't go over well, but if we're talking about preven mortality and what our goals are, and a certain farm is too high based on our targets, and I said, well, when you go into the farm and you do day one pig care for a week, what numbers do you produce? And it's not a good answer when they say, I don't know, I've never done it. And so when supervisors are demanding levels of production that aren't attainable, I don't know what else could be harder on morale than that. The other aspect is it's not, even though it's too high, it's not a steady, uniform event. There's spikes, which make it even worse. And Mariana and her group looking at several farms and these increases in mortality and these massive spikes. And if it's here where it's high temperatures and PRRS and this massive increase in mortality, you're asking a crew to do tasks that are very, very difficult. And so that aspect is, in my opinion, has to be addressed. And how do we have to fix this as an industry. And it's an issue that, it's going to take coordinated effort from research and geneticists and nutritionists and practicing veterinarians, that we're working toward improving this and at least acknowledging to the caretakers on the farm that go do that and get through that process yourself. Understand what they're going through on a daily basis. So, the task before us is to work towards solution to restore robustness in all phases of production, from sow longevity and piglet vigor and size at birth, nursery phase and finishing phase survivability, and to improve the sustainability, welfare, and employee morale. And one thing too, as these discussions occur, who's at the table on this? And to bear in mind, at times if you're not on the table, you're on the menu. Who's discussing, when are we back to an acceptable, what's acceptable? How do we know when we've reached our goal? If we haven't, determined that ahead of time. So those are my thoughts to lead off this session. I hope I've shed some light on it, and thank you again very much, John, for the invitation.
Thanks very much, Mark. We have time for a couple questions. Any questions for Mark? I've got one for you, Mark, and it's the question of employee morale and working through that. We did a survey many years ago that showed the major welfare concern in the sow units was sow mortality in downer sows. And is there a frustration that other issues are brought up externally compared to what the herds people think we should be emphasizing?
I think there's an agreement on that. It is downer sows, but even above that in the last, I'll say 8 years approximately, is pelvic organ prolapse. Dealing with those at 4 to 8% of your population annually, and so a 5,000 sow farm having somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 prolapses a year that have to be dealt with and euthanized and removed, that one would be right above the lames and downers and those issues. The sudden dead's the easy one.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Well, thanks very much, Mark, again.
Thank you.